Now let's look at the anthropological tale. So sheep are frequently used as victims in ritual sacrifice, and sheep can function as effective symbols for victims of scapegoating violence. And interesting aside, scapegoat, the word itself, has an animal in it, a goat, which is much like a lamb, a sheep. The word itself comes from an Anglican minister, William Tyndale, who translated the word Ahazel, Hebrew word Ahazel, as scapegoat. And actually, a colleague of mine wrote a whole book on the etymology of scapegoat. And if you look at the etymology of scapegoat, you'll see mimetic theory as clear as crystal. And sheep are particularly vulnerable creatures. Kenneth Bailey, wonderful biblical scholar. Anybody heard of Kenneth Bailey? He's written a lot on the parables, especially parables in Luke. He spent a lot of time in the Middle East with shepherds, and he offers like Palestinian perspectives on the parables, especially the prodigal son, which really opens it up in a powerful way. But he says, after spending years living with shepherds in the Middle East, he writes this about sheep. Sheep have a special problem. They have no defense. Cats have teeth, claws, and speed. Dogs have their teeth and their speed. Horses can kick, bite, and run. Bears can claw, bite, and crush. Deer can run, but the sheep have no bite or claws and cannot outrun any serious predator. They can butt other sheep, but that ability will not protect them from a wolf or a bear. The sheep's only security is the shepherd. So apart from the shepherd, the sheep lack any real champion. Now, when I'm applying the anthropological tale, I'm looking at Girardians and how they're talking about mimetic rivalry and the scapegoat mechanism. And I see them using this same language. So they talk about sheep, they talk about goats as the victims. And when they talk about the scapegoat mechanism, they actually use language of like a monster, a beast, or even a wolf. Girard spent a lot of time writing about Shakespeare. He has a whole book called Theatre of Envy, where he's applying mimetic theory to Shakespeare. And he spent some time with this one passage from Troilus and Cressida, which the character Ulysses says, "Then everything includes itself in power, power into will, will into appetite, and appetite, and universal wolf, so doubly seconded with will and power, must make perforce and universal prey, and last eat up himself." There's a whole book on Shakespeare's universal wolf. Girard interprets the universal wolf as the violent scapegoating mechanism and the universal prey as the scapegoat. So the wolf can be seen as this personification of the compulsion to blame. So the gospel's response to our question of suffering invites us to identify with the interrogators, as we talked about last Tuesday, driven by the compulsion to blame. Therefore, with which symbols are we invited to identify in this image field, in this paroimia? The sheep or the wolf? And I would say, obviously the sheep, clearly the sheep. But I would also say, based on an in-depth reading of the interrogation narrative, we see parts of the passage inviting us to identify with the interrogators and the disciples who asked the question in the first place. We're also invited to identify with the wolf. And how do we experience the Good Shepherd when we identify with the wolf? So once again, I have this graph that I keep showing because it applies to all sets of images that we've looked at. So we have the accused but innocent victim, which is the day, the vision, and the sheep. They're all different ways of understanding the accused but innocent victim. the accusing but guilty victimizer. It's the night, it's the blind, it's the wolf. Now the Good Shepherd subverts the dichotomy, this opposition that's created with this dichotomy, by working to embrace and transform both the sheep and the wolf. This is important here because once this is exposed, you see, okay, there's sort of the good guys and the bad guys, right? But once we create that, that's just perpetuating the system. Okay, then let's just blame the bad guys. Say, no. You got to stop blaming altogether. Let's hold them both. We're going to interact with them differently, but we got to hold them both together. And that's what the Johannine Jesus does. That's what the Good Shepherd does. Just as the light embraces the day and the night and changes them both, just as the judge embraces the blind and those who see and changes them both, the Good Shepherd embraces both the sheep and the wolf and changes them both. And that's good to know because we are to say I'm just a sheep, I'm a good disciple of Jesus, I'm one of the good sheep, is simplistic. There's some wolf in us, in me. And what does Jesus do with that? I want Jesus to take some of that. Anne.
She's saying we're called to integrate the two.
Yeah.
Knowledge.
Right.
The will integrate, deal with, resolve.
Absolutely, yeah. There's something I didn't really mention Carl Jung in any of this, but it is sort of Jungian. Like there's this invitation to look at our own shadows and bring that to light. Expose that to the light of judgment, to be healed. And that shadow might look like a wolf. Now, in the imagery of, this is C.H. Dodd, he says, in the imagery of the discourse, the heroic shepherd goes out to meet the wolf, meet our dark shadows, and lays down his life in defense of his flock. This provides the evangelist with the clearest and most explicit statement he has yet permitted himself upon the passion of Christ as voluntary and vicarious self-sacrifice. So Dodd clearly sees this as the Johannine Jesus' way of talking about the reason he had to die, his theory of atonement, the Johannine theory of atonement. The shepherd, I argue, does not attack and kill the wolf. And that's not in the story. That's not in the Paroimia. Instead, the shepherd is willing to let the wolf take his life. Even though he might be killed by the wolf, the heroic Good Shepherd still does not give up on the wolf. Again, just as I keep saying, as Jesus is being crucified, what's he doing? Father, forgive them. As the Good Shepherd is being killed by the wolf, saying, okay, I'm still going to love you. And I'm going to do that by letting you kill me and then coming back from the dead and forgiving you so you get out of this cycle. So Jesus is willing to take the blame for the world's suffering, even if that means laying down his life. So that's what I'm arguing to be Jesus' ultimate answer to our question. I need someone to blame for the suffering in the world. Jesus is saying, okay, I'll take it. Ultimately, I want you to get out of blaming, but if you really need someone to blame, I'll be that one. So he responds by first exposing us as the violent accusers, but instead of condemning us to an eternity in hell, he engages with us. In fact, he even lets us blame him for the suffering in the world. He meets our wolves. As the Good Shepherd, the Johannine Jesus says, yes, I will receive your accusations. I will let you blame me. I will let you unleash what you believe to be your righteous anger against me. I will even let you accuse me of being a monster because based on your limited knowledge and vision, your blindness, I can understand how you might arrive at that conclusion. I will lay down my life and let you kill me. You cannot fully understand the meaning of this world's suffering, but because you demand to blame someone, I will be that someone. I will be your object of blame so that you can learn to stop blaming altogether. I will transform you through my forgiveness, which is embodied in my resurrection. So this really takes Anselm's theory and changes it quite a bit. I find it somewhat ironic because actually one of the first paper I ever presented at an academic conference was all about dismantling Anselm's theory of atonement. But I've come to really appreciate him. But he basically says that this, at least how he has been interpreted by Luther and Calvin and Charles Hodge over the years, God is the one who has the compulsion to blame. But what this is saying is actually, no, we're the ones who want to do that, who feel the need to do that. Now, this is a quote from an Episcopal bishop who was the bishop of South Carolina, known as Fitz, but Christopher Fitzsimmons Allison has the same last name as James Allison, but with 2 L's, which is a little frustrating for my bibliography. I came across this book on a shelf at CDSP, and I found him saying what I'm saying. Let me read his quote from Guilt, Anger, and God. He says, "If we understand that we have a natural aggression which is aggravated by the inevitable frustrations of life," so let's hear that. If we understand that we have a natural aggression which is aggravated by the inevitable frustrations of life, there I hear him talking about the wolf, the parts of us that are just unhappy, that we use each other and ourselves as scapegoats. He's using this language. He's not Girardian, but he's using this language. That deepest aspect of our anger is in the face of innocent suffering and injustice, that which we just witness all around us, and that the often unrecognized but primary object of our anger is toward God. And that the often unrecognized but primary object of our anger is toward God, then we are at the very center of Christianity, asking the question to which the crucifixion of Christ is the answer. He says, the God of atheists is that aloof and all-powerful principle which, because of evil it will not heal, is denied by the atheist in the angry name of his own sense of justice. A lot of atheists that I know, this is their reason for atheism. How could there be a God of love when there's so much suffering? And he's saying, that's the right question. And the answer is the cross. That's where God hears that question and says, yeah, you don't understand, but I'm going to limit myself to your small-mindedness and let you blame me in order to get you out of that. He says, the God of Christians is he whom we see in Jesus Christ. He takes our resentment in his torn hands, our bitterness in his nailed feet, our hatred in his pierced side, and buries them. Yet, it is not as a scapegoat that Christ takes our anger, but as a lamb. This is really interesting what he does here. The all-important difference between a scapegoat and a lamb is that the lamb makes us responsible. Scapegoats for our anger are projections that feed our self-righteousness. We always attempt to justify ourselves with scapegoats. The Lamb of God puts the responsibility back in our laps, where we are no longer able to justify ourselves. This is me. The other all-important difference between the scapegoat and the lamb is that the lamb forgives and thus inspires conversion and transformation in us through forgiveness. One thing alone, Girard insists, can put an end to this infernal ordeal of human violence and scapegoating: the certainty of being forgiven. I noticed that we've had several different logos and symbols for Christ Church Eureka. Right now it's the beautiful dove stained glass window. Looking at old bulletins, it's that cross, that really ornate sort of floral cross. But even before that is this, the Lamb. And if you look at this plaque, the Lewis Hall plaque, in the top left-hand corner is this beautiful logo of a lamb. I'd love to get the original copy of that. And we see that all the time. We sing Agnus Dei, Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. Lamb of God takes away the sins of the world. Have mercy on us. Grant us thy peace. That starts to make a lot more sense to me. And starts to be very powerful. It's Jesus coming into our scapegoat mechanism, not as a scapegoat to justify, to keep us in our system, but as a lamb to say, hey, look what you're doing. Stop doing this. I'm going to get you out of it through my love and forgiveness. Christ's response to the question of suffering is an invitation to both be held by the shepherd and to behold the lamb. That was the original name for my dissertation. Beholding the lamb, being held by the shepherd. To be eventually winnowed of our anger, violence, and resentment by the lamb, whose transformative forgiveness takes away the sin of the world and grants us peace. So after all that, returning back to theories of atonement, how does this change or deepen your understanding of the cross and theories of atonement? And out of those 4 theories, which resonates most with what we've learned in reading The Good Shepherd in light of the anthropological tale?